After years with my childhood sweetheart, she left me broken. I finally found peace in a new love, but my family called her a phase. They invited my ex to New Year's dinner and left my girlfriend off the list. At dinner, they said out loud, "Lauren's the kind you marry." Jessica cried in the bathroom. I walked out with her. My grandmother said, if I left, not to come back. Now they say I abandoned my family just to be loved right. I spent months in therapy trying to heal from a love that broke me, only to learn that the people I thought were my safe place were the ones still holding the knife. My name is Eric. I'm 28, and for the first time in my life, I chose someone who truly saw me even when it meant walking away from everything I once called home. Lauren and I were next-door neighbors, since before we even knew how to spell our own names. Our parents joked that we were bound to end up together before we even hit kindergarten. We shared sidewalk chalk, scraped knees, and long summers filled with bike rides and late-night games of tag under porch lights. As kids, we had our own secret language of glances and grins. As teenagers, that closeness slowly shifted into something deeper. We started dating when I was 17. It didn't feel like falling in love. It felt like realizing I'd been in it all along. We were inseparable. We applied to the same colleges, though I ended up staying closer to home while she followed her dream of becoming a teacher. We made it work through phone calls, long drives, and weekends that never felt long enough. I worked part-time jobs to save for gas money. She sent me care packages with notes that still sit folded in an old shoebox I can't bring myself to throw away. Lauren was beautiful, genuinely beautiful, but it was more than that. She had a kind of presence that made people feel safe. Her eyes carried warmth, her voice carried calm, and when she walked into a room, it was like someone had turned the volume down on the world. She was the kind of person who remembered birthdays, brought soup when you were sick, and never let anyone feel left out. When she became a school teacher, it just made sense. She had this steady, nurturing energy, like she'd been preparing for that role all her life. My family adored her. My mother would light up when Lauren visited. My grandmother used to take her aside at holidays to share recipes and family stories. My dad once told me, half joking, that if I ever lost her, I'd lose the whole family with her. And honestly, I believed it too. We'd weathered so much together, from being broke college students splitting takeout, to getting our first real jobs, to talking late into the night about where we'd want to raise our future kids. She was my person. There was never anyone else. At least that's what I thought. Lauren and I grew up next door to each other. We were the kind of kids who shared crayons before we knew how to spell each other's names. From middle school through high school, people called us the golden couple. We had history, familiarity, and a kind of silent rhythm that made everything inevitable. We started dating when I was 17. It felt right, like breathing. She was beautiful in the way that made people pause, soft eyes, a calm voice, and this quiet grace that made every room a little gentler when she walked in. Lauren became a school teacher, and if you asked anyone in my family, they would have told you she was the perfect woman. My mother adored her. My grandmother used to call her our Lauren. There wasn't a single holiday, birthday, or family dinner where she wasn't at the table, helping set the dishes or laughing with my cousins. To them, she was already family. For a long time, I thought we were heading toward marriage, and we were. We talked about rings, houses, future kids. We even planned a small anniversary dinner to mark our 10 years together. But as the years passed and I began climbing at work, taking on bigger roles, managing more people, chasing promotions, I found myself stretched thinner than I ever expected. My time was no longer my own. I wasn't available to text back right away or talk on the phone for hours like I used to. And Lauren, as understanding as she tried to be, needed that connection. She was someone who felt deeply, who overthought in silence, and needed reassurance in the little things. If I didn't answer her messages quickly, she would spiral, wondering what she'd done wrong. If I missed a call, she'd go quiet for hours, and I'd return to 3 texts that all ended with, "Are you mad at me?" Lauren had always been emotionally tuned in, but after her parents passed away in a tragic accident a few years into our relationship, she became even more sensitive. With no remaining close family, I became her anchor, and I wanted to be that for her. But sometimes, I just couldn't be everywhere at once. There were birthdays I missed, anniversaries I nearly forgot, and even a few times when she was sick, and I couldn't be there because I was tied up at the office. She never yelled, never accused, but her silence said enough. I'd see it in the way she'd retreat, quietly wiping her tears, smiling like she was okay even when I knew she wasn't. The breaking point came on our 10-year anniversary. She had planned everything. A dinner reservation at an upscale restaurant she'd saved for months to afford. A new dress, her makeup carefully done. I had promised I'd be there. But someone quit unexpectedly at work that week, and I was asked to take over a huge project to meet end-of-quarter deadlines. I knew it was important, not just for me, but for the team, for the company. Missing that night felt like a betrayal to Lauren, but staying felt like a betrayal to everything I'd worked for. I called her an hour before our reservation, told her I couldn't come, promised we'd do something soon. She was quiet. She said okay, in a voice so small I could barely hear it. The next evening, I came home to find her waiting for me. No smile, no small talk, just a silence that sat between us like a wall. She asked me to sit down, and then she started talking. It wasn't a conversation, it was a storm she'd been holding in for years. She told me how it felt to always be waiting, to constantly wonder where she stood on my list of priorities. She said she was tired of making excuses for me to her friends, of always being the one who forgave missed plans and late replies. She brought up birthdays I'd forgotten, nights she had been sick and alone, times she had dressed up just to end up eating takeout by herself. She said I made her feel invisible, in the one place she was supposed to feel seen. I tried to explain that I was doing it for us, that I wanted to give her a better life, that this promotion, these late nights, were my way of loving her, but she wasn't having it. She said, I didn't want a provider. I wanted a partner. I wanted. Her voice cracked, and then she cried. Not the quiet, composed tears I was used to, but deep, heaving sobs like something inside her had finally given out. She stood up and started packing her things, moving with this quiet devastation that made me feel like a stranger in my own home. I followed her from room to room, begging her to stop, to just sit and talk it through. I reminded her of everything we had built. I told her I could change, that I would find a better balance, that I hadn't realized how far I drifted until she pointed it out. But she was done listening. She said she'd already given me too many chances. She deleted our photos. She returned every gift and letter I had ever given her, dropping them on the coffee table like evidence of something that no longer mattered. It wasn't just the breakup, it was the way she stripped away 10 years like they were nothing. Like I was nothing. The apartment felt haunted for days. Her perfume lingered in the hallway. Her handwriting on sticky notes made my stomach twist. Every room felt like a reminder of what I'd lost. I didn't sleep. I barely ate. The silence in that space screamed louder than any fight we'd ever had. I stopped showing up to work some days. I'd sit in my car in the parking lot and just stare through the windshield until the clock told me I'd missed half the day. I stopped responding to emails. Deadlines blurred into each other. I couldn't find the energy to pretend anymore. My body went through the motions, but my mind was stuck in that living room, watching her pack her life away. Most nights, I drank. Not heavily at first, just enough to feel a little less. But that line blurred too. A glass of whiskey after dinner turned into a bottle. I told myself it was temporary, that it helped me sleep, but it did. I'd still wake up in a cold sweat, heart racing, hand reaching for someone who wasn't there. I didn't recognize myself. I stopped going to the gym. I canceled on friends. I ignored calls from my mom. I didn't want to explain why I felt like a hollow version of the person they knew. I didn't want them to hear it in my voice that I was unraveling. One night, I looked in the mirror and didn't see Eric. I saw someone lost, someone clinging to the memory of something that was already gone, and that's when I knew I needed help. I started therapy not long after, because I couldn't function. I couldn't concentrate at work. I kept replaying that night over and over. Her voice, her words, the sound of the door clicking shut. I'd sit on the edge of my bed for hours, just staring at the floor, feeling like I'd slipped through some invisible crack in the world and didn't know how to climb back up. There were days I couldn't even get out of bed. Days when I thought maybe I wouldn't be missed if I just disappeared. My mind would wander into dark corners, places I had never been before. I didn't want to die. Not exactly. I just didn't know how to keep living in that hollow space where everything I'd cared about felt gone. Therapy wasn't a quick fix. It was brutal, honestly. At first I sat there in silence, unable to speak. When I finally did open up, it felt like tearing off layers of skin just to explain how much it all hurt. Some days I left those sessions more exhausted than when I came in. There were times I thought about quitting, times I felt like I wasn't making any progress at all, like nothing would ever feel okay again. But I kept going, not because I believed it would work, but because doing nothing scared me more. And slowly, very slowly, the fog started to lift. Some days, the progress was almost invisible. I'd go to therapy and talk about the same things over and over, thinking, what's the point? But other days, I'd find myself walking out of the session feeling just a little bit lighter. I started sleeping a few more hours. I started eating breakfast, even if it was just toast. I'd open the blinds in my apartment and let the light in, even when I didn't want to see it. There were breakthroughs that didn't feel like breakthroughs at the time, like admitting out loud that I felt abandoned not just by Lauren but by myself, like realizing I had stopped doing things I loved, reading, sketching, even listening to music. There were moments in therapy when I would say something and immediately want to take it back because it hurt so much to say it out loud, but I didn't take it back. I kept showing up. My therapist reminded me that grief isn't linear, that healing doesn't mean forgetting, that I could mourn the relationship while also learning to make room for something new, for someone new. But more importantly, for myself, I started journaling again. I took long walks without a destination. I cried in the shower and let it be enough for the day. I cut back on the drinking, not because someone told me to, but because I wanted to remember things again, to feel things again. It wasn't a dramatic change. There was no single moment where I said, I'm healed. But over time, the ache became manageable. The shadows in my mind got quieter. The silence in the apartment started to feel less like a void and more like space. Space I could fill on my own terms. But in those early months, I was just surviving, breathing in, breathing out, trying not to fall apart again before the next appointment. And the silence in my family felt even louder. You see, my family loved Lauren. They didn't just like her, they cherished her. To them, she was already part of the family long before any proposal. Even after the breakup, they kept inviting her to birthdays, Sunday dinners, and even my cousin's engagement party. They said it was because she had no one else around, and they didn't want her to feel alone, especially around the holidays. They justified it by saying she had been through enough already. When I objected, they told me it might actually help me, that seeing her again might be good for me, that maybe being around her could help us both find our way back to each other. My mom even said, sometimes people need time apart to realize what they had. You two belong together. We're just keeping the door open. My grandmother nodded along, saying it would be healing, that it wasn't about taking sides, it was about compassion. I didn't have the strength to argue, and because a part of me still loved her, and because another part of me was too tired to fight, I said yes. I told myself it would only be a few times. I tried to believe them when they said it would mean a lot to everyone. Months passed. Therapy helped. Slowly, I found pieces of myself I didn't know I had lost. And then I met Jessica. We met at a small weekend art market, tucked behind an old bookstore I almost never visited. She was managing a booth of vintage cameras and handmade prints. I only stopped to ask about a lens, but we ended up talking for over an hour. It was the first time in months that a conversation didn't feel heavy. She had this way of pulling you in without trying, like gravity, but softer. That night, I walked away with an old Polaroid and her number scribbled on the back of a receipt. Jessica was nothing like Lauren. She had short dyed hair, a nose ring, and a constellation of tattoos that danced along her arms like stories waiting to be told. She worked freelance in creative fields, photography, set design, anything that paid enough to get by and let her breathe. To my family, she was chaos. To me, she was freedom. With Jessica, everything felt alive again. She didn't tiptoe around my grief. She sat with it. She didn't ask me to be better. She made me feel like I already was. Our dates were spontaneous. Midnight coffee runs, impromptu beach walks, long drives with no destination. She reminded me what it felt like to be young, to be present, to be seen not as a work in progress but as someone already whole, even if a little cracked around the edges. While Lauren was calm, Jessica was vibrant. While Lauren corrected my posture and my tie, Jessica kissed me mid-sentence and laughed at all the wrong times. She never judged me for my scars. She never asked why I couldn't sleep some nights. She just sat beside me, held my hand, and let the silence be enough. With Lauren, there had always been this quiet expectation to be stable, responsible. The Rock, with Jessica, I could be vulnerable, messy, human. She didn't try to fix me. She didn't need me to perform strength. In her presence, I didn't have to earn love. I simply received it. When I introduced her to my family, the reception was cold. Not icy in an obvious way, but the kind of cold that sinks into your skin slowly, like walking into a house with the windows cracked open in the dead of winter. There were polite smiles, sure, but none of them reached anyone's eye. Conversations slowed when she spoke. My mom asked about her job, then followed it with, "But what do you do for real income? Like a steady paycheck?" Brittany, my sister-in-law, whispered to David across the table, loud enough for me to hear. "She looks like she got lost on the way to a music festival," my grandmother said. She colorful, then added, "Well, as long as Eric's happy," in the kind of tone people use when they mean the opposite. David barely looked at her. He kept his eyes fixed on his plate, only chiming in to change the subject whenever Jessica asked a question. My mom spent most of the night reminiscing about Lauren, bringing her up in every story like she was still part of the family. Every comparison was subtle but sharp, like Lauren always made the best apple pie, or remember when Lauren organized that charity drive at the church. Jessica offered to help set the table and was told, "Oh, we already have our rhythm here," while my aunt looked her up and down as if she'd brought in dust from the street. During dinner, my cousin whispered to his fiancée, loud enough for us to catch it, "She's not what I pictured Eric ending up with." At one point, my uncle asked, So where's the sweet girl you used to bring around? The one who made the stuffing that year. He looked genuinely confused, like Jessica was a guest who'd wandered in by mistake. Still, Jessica stayed kind. She brought wine to dinner and arrived a little early to offer help with setting the table. She complimented my mom's cooking, not out of politeness, but with genuine warmth. When dessert came out, she offered to serve. When the dishes piled up, she rolled up her sleeves and started cleaning without being aches. She even brought a small gift for my grandmother, a pressed flower bookmark she'd made herself. Jessica asked about my cousin's schools, about my uncle's fishing trip, about my niece's new piano class. She tried. She really tried. And it hurt to watch her smile through the discomfort, to watch her search for connection in a room full of people who had already decided she didn't belong. Lauren had been warm, yes, but Jessica was equally gracious in her own way. She didn't lack manners or effort or heart. She simply didn't look or sound like what they had expected. And for that, they gave her distance. She did everything right. She was respectful, generous, and attentive, and still it wasn't enough. Then came the New Year's party. I found out through a family group chat that Lauren was not only invited, she was being asked to help organize. And Jessica wasn't even mentioned. Not once. Not in the guest list. Not in any of the meal prep threads. Not even as my +1. It felt like erasure. When I called my mom to confront her, the conversation escalated fast. She sounded irritated, not apologetic. She said I was being unreasonable, that Lauren had always been a part of our traditions, that excluding her now would feel wrong and make things uncomfortable for everyone else. I reminded her of everything, of how hard I'd worked to heal, how much pain that relationship had left behind. I brought up what my therapist had said, about boundaries, about trauma, about respect. I said clearly, for what felt like the 100th time, that I couldn't be in the same space as Lauren if I wanted to stay okay, not because I was bitter, but because I was healing. My mom cut me off. "You're blowing this out of proportion," she snapped. "Lauren's like a daughter to us. She doesn't have anywhere else to go for New Year's. You can't expect us to just abandon her. And Jessica, come on, Eric. She's not serious. She's just a phase." My aunt chimed in later that evening, during a group call, saying Jessica looked like she doesn't even own a decent dress and that no one will ever take you seriously with someone like that beside you. My grandmother added, "She looks more like someone you meet in a bar than someone you bring to a family dinner." David sent me another text. "You need to stop being dramatic and cut the act. Dump the tattoo girl. Get back with Lauren. Everyone knows she's the real deal." That was it. I felt something snap. I told my mom, if Lauren is there, I won't be. Not now. Not ever. I won't keep putting Jessica through this. And I won't keep pretending this family hasn't made their choice. My voice rose without meaning to. I could feel my hands shaking as I hung up the call, and when the silence came, it was heavier than before. That night, I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight, my head spun. I reached for the medication my therapist had prescribed months ago, something to calm the panic when it got bad. I hadn't touched it in weeks, but that night, I needed it. I curled up on the floor, trying to focus on my breathing, trying to remember what peace used to feel like before all of this. After that, I called Jessica and asked to meet. I hadn't planned on telling her what had happened. I was too ashamed, too drained, but I left my phone on the table when I went to the kitchen for water, and when I came back, she was holding it. The group chat, the texts from David, the cruel words about her, she had seen it all. She didn't say anything at first, just sat there with the screen still lit up in her hand, eyes scanning what must have felt like a stranger's reality. Her face was calm, but there was a heaviness to her silence, a tightness in her jaw that hadn't been there before. She didn't cry, but her expression said everything. It was the kind of sadness that doesn't need tears, just stillness. When I sat down beside her, she turned the phone off, set it on the coffee table, and looked at me not with pity, not even with hurt, but with that steady strength she always carried. "You don't have to explain," she said, gently, "but I need you to stay clear. Don't let their noise become your story. Don't let this pull you back into a version of yourself you already outgrew." She didn't offer advice. She didn't ask for decisions. She just reminded me to protect the clarity I had fought so hard for. And that's when I knew. She wasn't the reason I was losing anyone. They had already decided. So I didn't go to the New Year's party. I packed a bag, picked Jessica up, and we drove out of the city without a set destination. We ended up at a small cabin we found last minute, a place tucked into the woods, surrounded by silence and tall pines. It wasn't anything luxurious. The furniture was worn, the heater took its time, and the Wi-Fi barely worked. But it felt like sanctuary. We made pancakes in the mornings, our laughter echoing through the tiny kitchen. We played board games by the fire with mugs of tea in hand. I watched her tuck her feet beneath her on the couch and hum along to old records, And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was holding my breath. At night, she curled up next to me, her hand resting gently on my chest, steadying something in me I hadn't realized was still shaking. She didn't bring up my family, she didn't try to fix the fracture, she just gave me space to breathe again. That weekend wasn't about escape, it was about choosing peace, about reclaiming something I hadn't felt in a long time, the quiet joy of simply being with someone who wanted nothing from me but presence. It wasn't fancy, but it was real. It was warm, and it felt like breathing again. Thanksgiving came next. This time, I didn't wait for an invitation or a message. I told Jessica we were going. We showed up with a bottle of wine and a homemade pie she'd spent the night before baking. At the door, there was a moment of stunned silence. No one had expected us. My mother opened it with a forced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh," she said, glancing behind me as if hoping Jessica wasn't really there. "Well, come in." Inside, the air was thick. Tension hummed under the sound of football on TV and the clinking of dishes in the kitchen. Lauren was already there, comfortably helping in the kitchen, laughing with my aunt, wearing an apron that used to belong to my mom. As we walked in, I heard someone whisper, "So he brought her here? Now?" Another voice responded, "Well, let's see how long this one lasts." At dinner, the family complimented Lauren endlessly. Her mashed potatoes, her work with underprivileged kids, how sweet and steady she was. My uncle raised his glass and said, "Some girls you bring home to have fun. Some you bring home to build a future. Lauren's the kind you marry." Jessica went quiet. She smiled politely, but I saw the flicker in her eyes. I reached for her hand under the table, but she didn't grip back. Halfway through dessert, she excused herself and didn't come back. I found her in the downstairs bathroom, sitting on the floor, wiping at her face with shaking hands. "I'm sorry," she said. I tried. I really did. But it's like I walked into someone else's story, and everyone's just waiting for me to leave." Something in me cracked. I helped her up, took her coat, and walked back into the dining room. "We're leaving," I said. My voice was calm, but my chest was burning. My mom looked up, startled. "Eric, don't make a scene." "I'm not," I replied. "But I'm done pretending like Jessica doesn't exist, like she hasn't stood by me through every single low, like she's not more than enough." My grandmother set down her fork and looked straight at me. "If you walk out with her, don't come back. You understand? Your grandfather and I won't be around much longer. We just wanted to see you settled, not running around with some girl who doesn't even try to fit in." "She did try," I said, my voice shaking. "All she's done is try. It's you who never gave her a chance." My mother stood, arms folded. "If you want to throw away your family for a phase, that's your choice. But don't expect us to welcome you back when it's over." "Then don't," I said, grabbing Jessica's hand. "I'd rather build a home with someone who sees me than keep returning to a house that doesn't." We left. No one followed. No one called. David and Brittany haven't spoken to me since. My mom sent a short message, "Do what you need to do." And I guess that's the part that still stings. Not the rejection, not the silence, but the fact that when I finally chose someone who made me feel whole, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally did. That night, after we got home from Thanksgiving, Jessica tried to keep it together. She didn't want to make it worse. She poured us both a glass of wine, turned on some soft music, and sat beside me on the couch. But as soon as she saw I wasn't speaking, just staring blankly at the wall, she broke. Her shoulders started to shake. Her hand reached up to her face, and within seconds the tears came in waves. "I'm sorry," she whispered, over and over. "I'm so sorry you have to choose between being loved and being understood." I pulled her into my arms, and she cried against my chest, not for herself, but for me, for what they had done to me, for what I had been forced to carry. Her sobs were quiet, but they hit me harder than any fight I'd had with my family, because she wasn't angry. She was hurt, deeply, achingly hurt for my sake. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself cry too. I felt the weight of it all, years of unmet expectations, of trying to be the version of me they wanted, of hiding my pain to keep the peace. It all came crashing down in that living room, in the arms of the only person who had never asked me to be anything but myself. In that moment, I realized just how much damage silence can do, and how lucky I was that, even after everything, I hadn't lost. We spent Christmas with her family that year. Her mom made too much food, her dad told corny jokes, her younger brother challenged me to a Mario Kart tournament and destroyed me. It wasn't perfect, but it was warm, and I laughed more than I had in months. But even with the laughter, a quiet ache lingered. Not long after we returned, I got a call from my aunt. My grandmother had been admitted to the hospital. Her health had declined rapidly. I sat there on the edge of the bed, phone pressed to my ear, frozen. Then came the messages, one after another. My mom's text turned sharp. You're really not going to come see your grandmother. You abandoned your family for a girl you barely know. Your grandma might not make it through the season, and you're off playing house. I stared at those words for a long time. My thumb hovered over the screen, but I didn't reply. Each message pierced deeper than the last. She told me I was being cruel, selfish, that I was breaking their hearts, that all my grandmother had ever wanted was to see me settled and stable. She always dreamed of seeing you get married, Eric. My mom wrote, to someone like Lauren, not this. I wish I could say I felt sure that I stood tall in the choice I made, but the truth is, I didn't. I felt guilty. I felt torn. I paced the apartment. I went days without sleeping well. I kept asking myself if I was wrong, if I had been too rigid, if I had let anger and pride cost me a chance to say goodbye, if Jessica was really the cause of all this pain, or just the mirror that showed me how deep the fracture had always been. So, here I am, sharing this with you, not because I want pity, but because I think maybe someone else out there has stood in my shoes, wondering if choosing yourself makes you selfish. And I guess that's the part that still stings. Not the rejection, not the silence, but the fact that when I finally chose someone who made me feel whole, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally